Daniel stood at the edge of the balcony, his hands gripping the ornate railing as he gazed out across the sprawling city of Astera, the glittering capital of the planet Verelia. The sky above was a soft, pearlescent lavender, streaked with clouds of silver that shimmered in the fading light. Below him the city buzzed with life, a maze of sleek, futuristic buildings, gleaming transport tubes, and floating platforms that whirred silently through the air. It was a marvel of technological achievement, a testament to the sheer brilliance of Verlian society. Yet, as Daniel looked out at the beauty and complexity of it all, he felt utterly detached, like a ghost wandering through someone else's dream. The Palace of Azura, where Daniel lived and worked, loomed behind him an architectural wonder that fused organic shapes with sleek metal, its walls flowing like liquid into impossible curves and towers. It was a palace fit for a queen, and in every way Azura was that and more. She was not just a ruler, she was an enigma, a force of nature, who had woven her way through the highest echelons of galactic politics, rising to become one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy. Her wealth was immeasurable, her influence boundless, and Daniel was a servant, a cog in the massive, well-oiled machine that was Azura's court. For 2 years he had toiled in the palace, performing tasks that seemed both menial and absurdly luxurious. He polished artifacts from distant planets, served exotic meals whose ingredients he couldn't pronounce, and stood silently in the grand halls during endless processions of Viridian elites. Each day felt like a play in which he had no role but to fade into the background, invisible among the gilded fixtures and shimmering decor. It was a life far removed from anything he had known on Earth, a planet that now felt like a distant, fading memory. Daniel had come to Verelia after the collapse of his marriage, seeking distance from the emotional wreckage he had left behind on Earth. His wife, Jessa, had been the center of his world, but their relationship had unraveled in ways he could barely comprehend. She wanted more family, stability, a future that Daniel, adrift in his own uncertainties, couldn't provide. Their love had withered, leaving only the hollow shell of a bond that once felt unbreakable. In the end, their parting had been inevitable, and Daniel had fled, hoping that a job in a far-flung corner of the universe would give him the time and space he needed to heal. But now, as he stood on that balcony, he wondered if healing was possible in a place so alien, so far from the familiar warmth of Earth. Daniel, the voice was soft, yet it commanded attention. He turned sharply, pulling himself from his reverie, and saw her. Azura. She stood just a few steps away, her presence as commanding as ever. Her emerald-green skin seemed to glow faintly in the twilight, the subtle ridges along her high cheekbones catching the light. Her blue eyes, sharp and intelligent, glimmered with an intensity that always seemed to leave him momentarily speechless. She wore a flowing gown of deep violet that seemed to shimmer as she moved, the fabric hugging her regal frame like liquid starlight. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her back, braided intricately in the traditional Verlian style, adorned with small gems that caught the light with every step. Daniel straightened, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty." Azura smiled, a small, knowing smile that hinted at amusement. "You can dispense with the formalities, Daniel. We're alone." She glided closer, her movements graceful and effortless, as though she were a part of the air itself. Despite her ethereal beauty, there was something undeniably human in her gaze, a curiosity, a spark that belied the cold, distant persona she projected to the rest of the galaxy. "What were you thinking about just now?" she asked, her tone casual, though Daniel could feel the weight of the question. Azura never asked questions idly. Everything she said had a purpose, a layer of meaning beneath the surface. Daniel hesitated. "I was just thinking about home, Earth." Azura murmured, her eyes flickering with understanding. "Earth. Such a small planet, isn't it? So insignificant on the galactic scale, yet it occupies such a large space in your heart." He nodded. "It's where I grew up, where I lived my life. Even after everything, it's hard to let go." Azura moved to stand beside him, her gaze sweeping over the city below. "I understand that feeling. We Verolians, too, hold attachments to our origins, even when we know we've outgrown them." Daniel glanced at her, curious. It was rare for Azura to speak of herself in personal terms. She was always guarded, always the enigmatic ruler, never the vulnerable woman. But tonight there was something different in her demeanor and openness that put Daniel slightly on edge. "I know you've had a difficult time adjusting here," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "It must be strange for you, living in a place so vastly different from your own. But I've seen how you carry yourself, Daniel. You don't let this world overwhelm you. You adapt, quietly, gracefully. That's a rare quality." Daniel wasn't sure how to respond. Praise from Azura was something people in the palace would kill for, yet it left him feeling oddly unsettled. "I try my best," he said simply. Azura turned her head slightly, studying him. "Do you ever regret coming here?" It was a question Daniel had asked himself many times, though he had never found a satisfactory answer. Did he regret leaving Earth? Yes, sometimes. But the alternative, staying in a life where he felt trapped, where his marriage had become a battleground, seemed far worse. He had hoped that distance would bring clarity, but in Virelia's alien grandeur, he had only found more questions. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, the honesty in his voice surprising even himself. "Sometimes I think I made the right choice. Other times, it feels like I'm just running away." Azura's gaze softened. "We all run from something. It's what we do after we stop running that matters." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel couldn't help but wonder what Azura had run from in her own life. Despite her immense power and influence, there were moments when he caught glimpses of a deeper loneliness in her, a longing for something beyond the endless politics and intrigue of her world. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime, echoing through the air like a distant bell. Azura sighed, a trace of frustration crossing her face. "Duty calls," she said, her voice tinged with weariness. "There's always another meeting, another negotiation." She turned to leave, but paused, her eyes locking onto Daniel's once more. "But don't forget, Daniel, this world isn't as foreign to you as you think. You may find that you belong here more than you realize." With that, she disappeared into the shadows of the palace, leaving Daniel alone once more on the balcony. Her words lingered in his mind, unsettling in their ambiguity. He looked out at the city again, the soft hum of Virelia's technology filling the air. He had never considered the possibility of belonging in this world. He had always seen himself as an outsider, a temporary guest in a place too vast and complex for him to ever truly understand. Yet Azura's words stirred something within him, a curiosity, a question he had been too afraid to ask himself. Could he find a place here? Could this world, with all its strange customs and alien beauty, offer him something he had been searching for all along? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Daniel pushed it aside, turning his back on the view and retreating into the palace. For now he would continue as he always had, a quiet observer in Azura's glittering empire. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. The seed of doubt, of possibility, had been planted, and no matter how much he tried to resist it, it would grow. The palace was quieter at night, though the faint hum of machines and the distant murmur of voices echoed through its vast halls. Daniel walked slowly, his footsteps barely making a sound on the smooth, polished floors. His mind was still occupied with thoughts of Earth, of Azura, and of the strange feeling that had begun to take root in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He passed by one of the grand chambers, the doors slightly ajar, and caught a glimpse of the court in session. Virelian nobles, draped in luxurious fabrics and adorned with intricate jewelry, sat around a grand table, their faces masks of polite indifference, as they discussed matters of state. Azura was at the head of the table, her expression unreadable, though Daniel could sense the weight of her authority even from a distance. For a brief moment, Azura's eyes flicked towards the door, and Daniel felt the sharp intensity of her gaze on him, but just as quickly, her attention returned to the matters at hand, and Daniel slipped away before anyone noticed him. In his quarters, he sat down on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. His room was small, modest by the palace's standards, but it was his space, a place where he could retreat from the overwhelming opulence that surrounded him every day. He lay back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, where soft, glowing patterns shifted like the waves of an ocean. As sleep began to pull him under, his thoughts drifted once more to Azura, to her words, and to the impossible choices that now seemed to loom in his future. He had come to Virelia to escape his past, to find peace in the distance. But now, he realized, he was on the cusp of something far more complicated, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Yet deep down, Daniel knew that the decision might no longer be his to make. And for the first time since he had arrived on Virelia, he felt truly afraid. The days that followed Azura's cryptic words on the balcony unsettled Daniel more than he cared to admit. He found himself thinking of her more often, her words replaying in his mind, like a puzzle he couldn't solve. What did she mean when she said this world wasn't as foreign to him as he thought? Could she see something in him that even he couldn't recognize? In the quiet hours of the early morning, Daniel wandered the palace halls, trying to escape the strange unease that had settled over him. His duties were straightforward: arrange the courtiers' chambers, prepare the grand halls for meetings, assist in the daily routines of the palace staff. But everything felt different now, as though Azura's attention had cast him in a different light. Her gaze had an intensity to it that Daniel couldn't shake, and it left him wondering what her true intentions were. Was she simply interested in the novelty of an earthborn servant, or was there something more? The thought both intrigued and unnerved him, a strange mixture of fascination and fear. One morning, as he polished the brass railings along the main corridor, Daniel noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. Glancing up, he saw Azura approaching, her flowing violet robes trailing behind her like liquid silk. Her presence seemed to make the very air in the room hum with energy, and as she drew nearer, Daniel felt his pulse quicken. He straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers and preparing for whatever cryptic remark she might offer today. But Azura didn't speak immediately. Instead, she stopped a few paces from him, her eyes studying him with that same unreadable intensity. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the palace's energy systems, a soft thrum that seemed to mirror the tension in the air. "Daniel," she said finally, her voice as soft as a whisper, yet it filled the corridor. "Walk with me." Her request caught him off guard. Usually their interactions were brief, and to the point: polite exchanges in passing or brief instructions given during formal occasions. But this an invitation to walk with her felt like something more. Without a word, Daniel fell into step beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance as they moved down the grand corridor. The walls were lined with holographic displays depicting the history of Varelia, the rise and fall of empires, great battles fought in the stars, and the ascension of Azura's family line to power. Each image glowed softly, casting the hallway in a warm, ethereal light. "I've been thinking about Earth," Azura said after a few moments of silence, her tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "It must be quite different from Varelia." Daniel nodded. "It is, in many ways. And yet you came here. Why?" The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Daniel hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I needed a change," he said carefully. "Things on Earth weren't going well for me. I thought distance would help." Azura glanced at him, her blue eyes sharp and curious. "You're speaking of your marriage, aren't you?" Daniel stiffened slightly, surprised by her directness. He hadn't spoken much about his personal life since arriving in Varelia, and he certainly hadn't expected the ruler of an entire planet to show interest in it. But something about Azura's gaze, about the way she seemed to see through him, made it impossible to deny. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "My wife and I, we're in the middle of a divorce." Azura didn't respond right away. They continued walking, the soft swish of her robes the only sound between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. "Divorce is an Earth custom, yes? The end of a marriage." Daniel nodded. "That's right, it's complicated. We were together for a long time, but things changed. We changed." Azura tilted her head slightly, as if considering this. On Varelia, relationships are often more fluid. Polygamy is common. Marriages can shift and evolve over time without the need for such finality. Perhaps that's why your Earth concept of love fascinates me." Daniel glanced at her, curious. "You find it strange?" "Not strange," Azura corrected, her tone gentle. "Just different. The idea of binding oneself to one person for life, to the exclusion of all others, it's a concept I've observed in many human cultures. Yet it seems to lead to so much heartache, so much conflict." Daniel shrugged, unsure of how to explain something so deeply ingrained in him. "I suppose it's about commitment, loyalty. At least that's how it's supposed to be. But sometimes things don't work out." Azura was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed ahead as they continued to walk. Daniel felt the weight of her contemplation, as if she were considering something far beyond their simple conversation. "Commitment is important," she said finally. "But sometimes we must be willing to adapt, to let go of old notions in order to embrace new possibilities." Her words struck a chord in Daniel, resonating with the turmoil that had plagued him since his separation from Jessa. He had always clung to the idea that marriage was supposed to be forever, that love was meant to endure through all challenges. But perhaps, as Azura suggested, there was another way of looking at it, a way that allowed for change, for growth, without the painful finality of loss. They came to a stop in one of the palace's inner gardens, a serene space filled with exotic flora from across the galaxy. Strange, bioluminescent flowers glowed softly in the dim light, their petals shifting colors with every breeze. A small fountain bubbled in the center of the garden, its waters flowing in an intricate spiral before disappearing into the ground. Azura turned to face Daniel, her gaze more focused now, as if she had come to a decision. "I know you've been struggling, Daniel. I see it in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. You're torn between two worlds, one that no longer holds a place for you, and one that feels alien, no matter how long you've been here." Daniel swallowed hard, the truth of her words striking him like a blow. She was right, he had been struggling. He had come to Virilia to escape, but instead, he had only found himself lost in a different way. This world, with all its beauty and complexity, had never felt like home to him, not really. "I don't know where I belong," he admitted quietly. "I thought coming here would make things easier, but—" Azura stepped closer, her presence commanding yet oddly comforting. "Perhaps you haven't allowed yourself to truly belong," she said softly. "You keep one foot in the past, clinging to memories of a life that no longer exists. But there is a future for you here, Daniel. A future where you could be more than just a servant, more than a man running from his past." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Her words were more than just a suggestion, they were an invitation. An invitation to step beyond the boundaries of his role, to consider a different path. But what was she offering? And more importantly, why? Azura reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. Her touch was cool, her skin smooth against his. "I see potential in you, Daniel," she said quietly. "Potential that goes beyond your duties here in the palace. You have a strength, a resilience that I admire. And I believe there is a place for you at my side." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken tension. Daniel's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications of her words. Was this a test? A game? Or was she truly offering him something more? "I don't understand," Daniel said, his voice low. "What exactly are you saying?" Azura's blue eyes locked onto his, and for a moment Daniel felt as if she could see straight into his soul. "I'm saying that you don't have to be a servant forever. You could be something more, Daniel, much more. But only if you're willing to let go of the past and embrace the possibilities that lie ahead." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel's mind spun with questions, doubts, and a strange, flickering hope. What was she offering him, and what would it cost him to accept? Before he could respond, a distant chime echoed through the garden, signaling the start of the council's daily session. Azura's expression shifted slightly, the queenly mask slipping back into place. She withdrew her hand from his arm, stepping back with a graceful nod. "I must go," she said, her tone more formal now. "But think about what I've said, Daniel. You may find that the future holds more for you than you realize." With that, she turned and swept out of the garden, leaving Daniel standing alone amid the glowing flowers and bubbling fountain. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, but the weight of her words remained, pressing down on him like a physical force. Daniel stared after her, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. What had just happened? Azura, the most powerful woman in the galaxy, had just hinted at something more, something far beyond the boundaries of their professional relationship. But what did she truly want from him? The sound of the fountain bubbled softly in the background, a steady rhythm that seemed to mirror the rapid beating of Daniel's heart. He turned, making his way back through the palace, his mind racing. He had never considered the possibility of being anything more than what he was, a simple servant in the grand palace of an alien queen. But now, that possibility loomed before him, vast and overwhelming. And for the first time since arriving on Virilia, Daniel felt the pull of something greater than himself. The following days passed in a blur of duties and reflection. Daniel continued his work, but his thoughts were consumed by his conversation with Azura. He found himself replaying her words over and over in his mind, trying to decipher their true meaning. Was she merely toying with him, testing his loyalty? Or was there something deeper at play? Each time he saw her, Whether in the grand halls or in passing, their eyes would meet for a brief, electrifying moment. There was something unspoken between them now, a tension that neither of them acknowledged, but was impossible to ignore. And with each passing day, Daniel felt himself being drawn deeper into her world, the boundaries between servant and queen growing more and more blurred. One evening, as he was preparing to retire to his quarters, a message arrived, a simple note, delivered by one of Azura's attendants. The note contained only a few words, but they sent a jolt of anticipation through Daniel's veins. "Meet me in the Starlight Chamber. Midnight." Daniel stared at the note, his heart pounding in his chest. The Starlight Chamber was one of the most private rooms in the entire palace, a secluded sanctuary where Azura went to meditate and reflect. For her to invite him there, it meant something significant. As the hour of midnight approached, Daniel found himself standing outside the entrance to the Starlight Chamber, his nerves on edge. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and he stepped inside, the air cool and fragrant with the scent of aAlien flowers. The chamber was dimly lit, the walls adorned with shimmering panels that mimicked the night sky, filled with thousands of tiny stars that twinkled in the darkness. And there, in the center of the room, stood Azura. She was dressed in a simple, flowing robe, her long silver hair loose around her shoulders. Her usual regal bearing was softened in this intimate space, and for the first time Daniel saw her not as a queen, but as a woman powerful, yes, but also vulnerable in a way he hadn't expected. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that set Daniel's nerves alight. He nodded, unsure of what to say. The air between them felt charged, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Azura gestured for him to sit on one of the low cushions scattered across the floor, and Daniel obeyed, his heart pounding. She sat across from him, her blue eyes never leaving his face. "There's something I need to tell you, Daniel," she began, her voice low and serious. "Something I've been considering for some time." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Azura hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. Then she spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want you to be more than just a servant, Daniel. I want you to be my companion, my partner." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel stared at her, his mind reeling. Companion? Partner? What was she saying? Azura leaned closer, her eyes locking onto his. "I want you to be a part of my life, Daniel. Not just as a servant, but as someone I can trust, someone I can rely on. I've seen your strength, your loyalty, and I believe you're capable of so much more." Her words sent a shockwave through Daniel's entire being. For so long, he had felt like a shadow in her world, an observer in a grand game he didn't fully understand. But now she was offering him a chance to step into the light, a chance to be something more than he had ever imagined. But with that offer came a choice that could change everything. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. Azura reached out, placing a hand gently on his. Her touch was cool, yet it sent a warmth through his entire body. "No one is ever truly ready for change," she said softly. "But sometimes we have to take a leap of faith." Daniel met her gaze, the weight of her words sinking in. She was right. He had been running from his past for too long, afraid to face the future. But now, standing at the precipice of something new, something terrifying and exhilarating, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he was ready to take that leap. The sky above the palace was a swirl of deep purples and reds, the setting sun casting long shadows across the gleaming city below. Daniel stood at the large window of his quarters, staring out at the alien world of Virilia, but his mind was miles away. He turned the small slip of paper in his hand, the note from Azura that had summoned him once again. The words were simple, but carried an unmistakable weight. "Tonight, the garden. Come alone." The note had unsettled him for reasons he couldn't fully explain. Ever since their conversation in the Starlight Chamber, a strange tension had hung in the air between them. Azura's words that night, offering him a place at her side, had left him restless. The idea of being more than just a servant had stirred something deep within him, but it also opened doors he wasn't sure he was ready to walk through. A soft chime broke the silence, signaling the hour. Daniel tucked the note into his pocket and made his way down the winding corridors of the palace. The palace staff, usually bustling with activity, had quieted for the evening, leaving the hallways eerily still. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness, as he headed toward the palace's inner garden. The garden was one of the few places in the palace where Daniel felt at peace. It was a vast, open space filled with towering trees and exotic plants from across the galaxy. Bioluminescent flowers glowed softly in the dark, casting the garden in a mystical light. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming aAlien blossoms, and the soft trickle of water from a nearby fountain added to the tranquil atmosphere. As Daniel entered the garden, he saw her Azura, standing near the fountain, her back to him. She was dressed in a long, flowing gown that shimmered like starlight, her silver hair cascading down her back in intricate braids. For a moment he hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. There was something different about tonight, something that made his stomach twist with anticipation and a strange sense of foreboding. "Daniel," she said without turning around, her voice soft but commanding. She always knew when he was near. "Come closer." He walked toward her, his footsteps muffled by the soft grass. When he reached her, Azura turned to face him, her blue eyes gleaming in the dim light. There was a softness in her gaze that Daniel had rarely seen before, a vulnerability that contrasted sharply with her usual regal demeanor. "You've been quiet lately," Azura said, her tone more conversational than formal. "Have I overwhelmed you?" Daniel shook his head, though the truth was more complicated. Ever since their last encounter, his mind had been consumed with questions and doubts. Azura's offer to make him something more than a servant had awakened feelings he hadn't expected, feelings that both thrilled and terrified him. "No, Your Majesty," he replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I've just been thinking." Azura smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I thought as much. You're a man who thinks deeply. That's one of the reasons I'm drawn to you." Daniel blinked, taken aback by the sudden confession. He had known for some time that Azura saw him as more than just a servant, but hearing her speak so openly about it was disarming. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Why me? Of all the people in your empire, why are you interested in someone like me? I'm just an ordinary man from Earth. I don't belong in a place like this." Azura's gaze softened further, and she stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them. When she spoke again, her voice was low and intimate, like a secret meant only for him. "Because you're not like the others. Everyone in my court, my advisors, my council, even my so-called friends, they all have agendas. They're all playing their own game, trying to manipulate me or use me for their own gain. But you're different. You have no ambition to rise above your station. You're honest, you're real." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Her words struck him in a way he hadn't expected. He had always thought of himself as insignificant in this world, a mere cog in the machinery of Azura's vast empire. But here she was, telling him that he mattered, that he had something she valued. It was almost too much to comprehend. "I see something in you," Daniel, Azura continued, her voice like silk. "Something I haven't seen in a long time. You remind me of a part of myself that I thought was lost, and that's why I've made my decision." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. What decision? Azura's eyes gleamed, and for a moment Daniel saw the power behind her gaze, the force of a ruler who had shaped empires and bent the galaxy to her will. But beneath that power, there was something else. Something more personal. "I want you to be my second husband," Azura said, her voice firm and steady, but filled with a quiet intensity. "Not just a servant, not just a companion. I want you by my side as my equal." The words hung in the air, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Daniel stared at her, his mind reeling. Had he heard her correctly? Was she truly offering him marriage? He struggled to process what she was saying. The concept was so foreign, so unimaginable, that it felt like a dream or perhaps a nightmare. "Your second husband," Daniel repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. You're asking me to marry you." Azura nodded, her expression calm but resolute. In Varillian society, polygamy is common. It's a way to forge alliances, to build stronger ties. But this isn't just about politics, Daniel. This is about you and me. I want you to be a part of my life in a way that goes beyond what we have now. Daniel's heart raced, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of emotions. On Earth, marriage was a sacred, monogamous bond built on love and commitment to one person. But here, on Varilia, the rules were different. Polyamory was not just accepted, it was a norm, a way of life. For Azura, this was not an unusual request, but for Daniel it was unimaginable. He took a step back, shaking his head in disbelief. I can't. I don't even know what to say. Azura's eyes flickered with understanding, but also with determination. I know this is a lot to take in, she said gently. But think about it, Daniel. You would no longer be a servant. You would have a place of honor in my life, in my empire. You would be by my side, sharing in everything I've built. You wouldn't have to hide in the shadows anymore. Daniel looked at her, his mind still struggling to grasp the enormity of what she was offering. He thought about Earth, about Jessa, about the life he had left behind, the divorce that had torn him apart, the pain of watching his marriage fall apart, the sense of failure that had driven him to leave his home planet and seek solace in a distant world. And now, here he was, standing in the garden of an alien queen, being offered a chance at something entirely new. A life of wealth, power, and influence. A place by the side of one of the most powerful women in the galaxy. But at what cost? I don't know if I can do this, Daniel said quietly, his voice trembling. I've barely come to terms with my divorce. And now you're asking me to enter into a second marriage, on a planet where I don't even fully understand the customs. It's too much. Azura stepped closer, her eyes filled with both compassion and resolve. I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, Daniel. I understand that this is a lot to process. But I want you to know that my offer stands. You don't have to answer me tonight. Take your time. Think about it. She reached out and took his hand in hers, her touch cool and reassuring. All I ask is that you consider what this could mean for you. For us. You've been running from your past for a long time. Maybe it's time to stop running and start building something new. Daniel looked down at their joined hands, his mind still spinning. He felt a strange mixture of emotions, fear, uncertainty, and something else. Something that whispered of possibility. He pulled his hand away gently, taking a step back. I need time to think. Azura nodded, her expression understanding. Of course, take all the time you need. For a long moment they stood in silence, the sounds of the garden, the bubbling fountain, the rustle of leaves in the breeze filling the space between them. Then, without another word, Daniel turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy as he made his way back to his quarters. That night, Daniel lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. Azura's proposal weighed heavily on him, the enormity of it pressing down on him like a physical force. He had come to Virilia to escape, to find peace in the distance from Earth. But now it seemed that his escape had only led him to a different kind of turmoil. He thought about Jessa, about their marriage and how it had fallen apart. The arguments, the misunderstandings, the slow erosion of the love they had once shared. He had loved her deeply, but that love hadn't been enough to hold them together. And now, as he faced the possibility of entering into a new marriage, an alien marriage, no less he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was he betraying the life he had left behind? Was he betraying himself? And yet, there was something about Azura's offer that intrigued him. The idea of being more than just a servant, of having a place of honor in her life, was tempting. He had spent his entire time on Virilia feeling like an outsider, a shadow in the Grand Palace. But now Azura was offering him a chance to step into the light, to become something more. But could he do it? Could he accept her offer and embrace a life so different from anything he had ever known? Could he let go of the values he had been raised with on Earth, the belief in monogamy, the sanctity of marriage, and step into a world where love and relationships followed a different set of rules? The questions spun in his mind, unrelenting, until finally exhaustion overtook him and he drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning Daniel woke early, the events of the previous night still fresh in his mind. He dressed quickly and made his way to the palace gardens, seeking the solace of the quiet space before the palace staff began their day. The cool morning air helped clear his head, but the weight of Azura's proposal still lingered. As he walked along the winding paths, he found himself thinking about the life he had left behind on Earth. He thought about Jessa, about the life they had tried to build together. They had shared so many dreams, so many hopes for the future. But in the end, those dreams had crumbled, leaving only bitterness and regret. He had come to Virilia to escape that pain, to find a fresh start. But now, as he faced the possibility of a new life, one so radically different from anything he had ever imagined. He wondered if he was truly ready for it. Suddenly he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Azura approaching, her expression calm but serious. "I thought I might find you here," she said softly. Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. "I needed some time to think." Azura stepped closer, her blue eyes searching his face. "And have you come to any conclusions?" Daniel swallowed hard, his mind still swirling with uncertainty. I don't know. This is all so overwhelming. I don't know if I'm ready to take on something like this." Azura reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. "I understand, Daniel, this isn't a decision you should make lightly. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, I value you. I value you. I value what we've built between us. And whatever path you choose, you will always have a place here." Her words were sincere, filled with a warmth that soothed some of the tension in Daniel's chest. He nodded slowly, grateful for her understanding. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. "I just need more time." Azura smiled faintly, a glimmer of affection in her eyes. "Take all the time you need." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone once more in the garden. As he watched her disappear into the palace, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The decision still loomed before him, but for the first time since Azura had made her proposal, he felt a glimmer of clarity. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: his life, whatever path he chose, would never be the same. The days following Azura's proposal blurred into a haze of uncertainty. Daniel found himself drifting through his duties like a man caught between two worlds. Each task, once a distraction from the complexities of his life, now felt heavy with the weight of his decision. His mind kept circling back to Azura's words, to the offer she had laid before him: a new life as her second husband, a partner in her vast empire. The more he thought about it, the more the enormity of what she was proposing pressed down on him. It wasn't just about becoming her consort, it was about stepping into her world fully, with all the power, politics, and responsibilities that came with it. And that world, he was beginning to realize, was far more treacherous than it appeared. One afternoon, as he was arranging the books in the palace library, Lasara, Azura's chief advisor, appeared in the doorway. She was a tall, elegant woman with sharp features and a mind as quick as a whip. Her eyes, a piercing shade of violet, studied Daniel with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She had never shown much interest in him before, but now her gaze seemed to linger on him with newfound scrutiny. "Daniel," she said, her voice smooth but laced with an edge of formality, "Her Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The council chamber was a place where decisions of great importance were made, a room filled with the most powerful and influential figures in Azura's court. He had never been summoned there before, and the thought of entering such a space now, after everything that had transpired between him and Azura, made his pulse quicken. "Of course," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. He placed the book he had been holding back on the shelf and followed Lasara through the winding halls of the palace. As they walked, Daniel could feel the weight of Lasara's gaze on him, though she remained silent. There was something calculating in the way she moved, something that made Daniel wonder if she already knew about Azura's proposal. If she did, what did she think of it? Lasara was fiercely loyal to Azura, but she was also pragmatic, always thinking in terms of strategy and alliances. What would she make of Azura's choice to bring a mere servant into her inner circle? The door to the council chamber loomed before them, large and imposing. Lasara gestured for him to enter, but she didn't follow. Instead, she gave him a curt nod, her expression unreadable, and disappeared down the hall. Daniel took a deep breath and stepped inside. The council chamber was a vast, circular room with high ceilings and walls adorned with intricate carvings that depicted the history of Virilia. At the center of the room stood a large table made of dark, polished stone, around which sat the members of Azura's council. They were a diverse group, some humanoid, others distinctly alien in appearance, but all radiated an air of authority. Their robes and adornments shimmered in the soft light, symbols of their status and power. Azura sat at the head of the table, her presence commanding as always. She wore a gown of deep indigo, her silver hair swept back in a series of intricate braids. Her blue eyes met Daniel's as he entered, and for a brief moment, a flicker of something passed between them, something private, unspoken. Then her gaze shifted, becoming cool and regal once more. "Daniel," she said, her voice steady, Thank you for joining us. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of all the eyes in the room turned toward him. He could sense the curiosity, the skepticism in their gazes. They knew who he was, Azura's servant, a man from Earth with no standing, no power. What could he possibly have to offer in this chamber of elites? I have called you here today, Azura continued, her voice calm and controlled, because there is a matter of great importance that I believe you should be a part of. The council members exchanged glances, some of them frowning, others merely curious. A few of them, most notably Varric, a tall, imposing man with dark skin and eyes like onyx, looked openly displeased. Varric was one of Azura's most trusted military advisors, known for his strategic brilliance and his ruthless ambition. He had never had much patience for Daniel, and now his expression made it clear that he was not pleased with Azura's decision to include him in such a meeting. Azura gestured for Daniel to take a seat at the table. Hesitantly he did so, feeling out of place among the gathered dignitaries. The air in the room was thick with tension, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that he was being tested, judged. As many of you are aware, Azura began, her gaze sweeping over the council, we are entering a critical phase in our negotiations with the Outer Rim colonies. These colonies, as you know, are vital to our trade routes and supply chains, and their cooperation is essential to maintaining stability in the region. Daniel listened intently, trying to follow the political intricacies being discussed. The Outer Rim colonies were a distant cluster of planets, largely independent but heavily reliant on trade with Virilia. Over the past few months, tensions had been rising between the colonies and the Virilian government, fueled by disputes over resources and territorial rights. Our initial talks have been less than fruitful, Azura continued, her tone measured. The colonies are growing increasingly resistant to our offers, and there is concern that they may seek alliances elsewhere, alliances that could destabilize the entire region. Varric leaned forward, his expression grim. We cannot allow that to happen, Your Majesty. If the colonies form alliances with the Trilax Confederacy, we could find ourselves facing a blockade of our key trade routes. That would be disastrous for our economy. Azura nodded. Exactly. Which is why we must tread carefully. Military action is not an option, at least not yet. We need a diplomatic solution. A murmur rippled through the council, and Daniel could sense the tension rising. The stakes were high, and the consequences of failure were severe. He had known in an abstract sense that Azura's position required her to navigate complex political landscapes, but hearing it discussed in such stark terms brought the reality of her world crashing down on him. Azura's gaze shifted to Daniel, and the room fell silent. This is where you come in, Daniel. Daniel blinked, startled. Me. Azura's expression remained calm, but there was a glimmer of something in her eyes, something that told him this moment had been planned. You have a unique perspective, she said, her voice even. You are not from Virilia. You are not bound by the same biases and assumptions that many of us here hold. Your outsider's view could offer us insights that we have not considered. Daniel felt the weight of the council's stares intensify. He could see the skepticism in their eyes, Varric's barely concealed disdain, Lasara's thoughtful calculation, and the quiet curiosity of the others. He was being put on the spot, asked to offer his thoughts on a situation he barely understood. It was a test, and he knew it. I'm not sure what I can offer, Daniel said slowly, choosing his words carefully. I don't know much about the politics of the Outer Rim colonies, but from what I understand, they feel marginalized, they're far from the core worlds, and they don't feel like they have a voice in the decisions that affect them. Azura nodded, encouraging him to continue. They're probably afraid that their needs will be overlooked, that they'll be forced into agreements that benefit Virilia more than them, Daniel said. If you want to reach them, you need to show them that you're willing to listen, that you're not just here to dictate terms but to understand their concerns. A silence fell over the room as the council absorbed his words. Daniel could feel the tension in the air, the weight of their judgment. He braced himself for criticism, for someone to dismiss his input as naive or irrelevant. But to his surprise, Azura smiled. Well said, Daniel. I believe you're right. The colonies need to feel heard. We need to approach this not as rulers but as partners. Varric, however, was less impressed. He leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. With all due respect, Your Majesty, we cannot afford to appear weak. If we approach the colonies with too much deference, they will see it as a sign of weakness and exploit it. Azura's gaze hardened, but her tone remained calm. I'm not suggesting we show weakness, Varric. I'm suggesting we show wisdom. Diplomacy is not about domination, it's about finding common ground. Varric's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. The tension between him and Azura was palpable, and Daniel could sense the undercurrents of power in the room. Varric was not just a military advisor, he was a man with his own ambitions, and it was clear that he did not approve of Azura's reliance on Daniel's input. The rest of the meeting continued with discussions of strategy and logistics, but Daniel's mind was elsewhere. He had known that stepping into Azura's world would mean entering a realm of power and politics, but he hadn't fully understood what that meant until now. The council room was a battlefield, and every word, every decision was a weapon. He had been thrust into this world without fully realizing it, and now he would have to navigate its treacherous waters. After the meeting, Daniel lingered in the hallway outside the council chamber, his thoughts racing. The weight of everything he had witnessed pressed down on him. Azura had brought him into her inner circle, and now there was no turning back. He was a part of this, whether he liked it or not. As he leaned against the cool stone wall, Lysara approached, her expression unreadable. "You handled yourself well in there," she said, her tone neutral. Daniel looked at her, unsure of how to respond. "I'm not sure I belong in that room." Lysara raised an eyebrow. "That's for Azura to decide, isn't it? And it seems she has already made her choice." Daniel hesitated. "Do you think this is a mistake? Bringing me into all of this?" Lysara studied him for a moment before answering. "Azura is a brilliant ruler. She doesn't make decisions lightly. If she believes you have a role to play, then you do." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But that doesn't mean it will be easy. There are those who will see your presence as a threat. Varric, for one." Daniel frowned. "He doesn't trust me." "It's not about trust," Lysara said quietly. "It's about power. Varric is a man who thrives on control, and he doesn't like the idea of someone from outside his world having influence over Azura. He sees you as a wild card, unpredictable, and therefore dangerous." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "I don't want to be a threat to anyone." Lysara's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Whether you want it or not, you are. By accepting Azura's proposal, by stepping into her world, you've entered a game of politics and power that you can't avoid. And you'll need to be careful." Her words lingered in the air long after she had walked away, leaving Daniel alone in the hallway, his thoughts a swirling storm of uncertainty. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found himself increasingly drawn into the inner workings of Azura's empire. He attended more meetings with the council, sat in on diplomatic discussions, and began to see just how complex and delicate the balance of power in Virilia truly was. Every decision, every word, had consequences that rippled out across the galaxy. As Daniel became more involved, he noticed a shift in the way people treated him. The palace staff, who had once seen him as just another servant, now looked at him with curiosity and sometimes with suspicion. The courtiers, too, began to take notice. Whispers followed him wherever he went, rumors swirling about his relationship with Azura and what it might mean for the future of the Empire. But it was Varric's attention that concerned Daniel the most. The military advisor's cold gaze seemed to follow him everywhere, and though Varric never openly challenged him, Daniel could feel the weight of his disapproval. There was something dangerous about Varric, something that made Daniel uneasy. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting, Daniel was making his way through one of the palace's quieter corridors when Varric appeared, stepping out of the shadows with a quiet, predatory grace. "Daniel," Varric said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. "I thought we might have a word." Daniel stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. "What is it?" Varric stepped closer, his dark eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You've made quite an impression on Her Majesty. But I wonder, do you really understand the game you're playing?" "I'm not playing any games," Daniel said, trying to keep his voice steady. Varric smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, but you are. Whether you realize it or not. And let me give you a piece of advice in this world. Those who don't play the game usually end up losing." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What do you want, Varric?" Varric's smile faded, and his gaze turned hard. "I want you to understand something, Earthman. Azura's empire is not a toy for you to play with. You may have her favor now, but favor is a fickle thing, and there are those of us who will not stand by and watch as you undermine everything we've built." Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with tension. "I'm not trying to undermine anything." Varric stepped even closer, his voice low and dangerous. "Good. Then stay out of my way." With that, Varric turned and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Daniel standing alone, the weight of his words heavy in the air. That night, Daniel sat alone in his quarters, his mind racing. He had always known that stepping into Azura's world would be difficult, but he hadn't anticipated the sheer complexity of the political web he had become entangled in. Varric's warning echoed in his ears, a constant reminder of the dangers that now surrounded him. But as he thought about everything that had happened, about Azura's proposal and the responsibilities it carried, Daniel realized something. Despite the risks, despite the fear and uncertainty, he couldn't walk away. There was something about Azura, something about the way she saw him, the way she believed in him that made him want to stay. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew one thing for certain: his life, his future, was no longer his own. He had become a part of something far greater, and there was no turning back. The tension in the air was palpable as Daniel stood on the balcony of the palace, gazing out over the sprawling city of Astera. The lavender sky had darkened into a deep indigo, and the stars above glittered like jewels scattered across the heavens. Below, the city was alive with the soft hum of floating transports and the glow of lights that stretched far beyond the horizon. It was a breathtaking view, one that had become familiar to him during his time on Virilia, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, everything had changed. For weeks, Daniel had been wrestling with Azura's proposal, her offer to make him her second husband, a partner not only in her personal life but in the vast political landscape of her empire. The idea had been overwhelming at first, a concept so far removed from his earthly upbringing that it had felt impossible to comprehend. But as the days passed, he found himself thinking about it more and more, turning it over in his mind like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. He had watched Azura navigate her world with a grace and intelligence that left him in awe. Her empire was a masterpiece of political maneuvering, held together by delicate alliances, complex treaties, and the ever-present threat of conflict. In every meeting, every conversation, she was in control, calm, composed, and always thinking 3 steps ahead. But there was another side to her, one that Daniel had come to know in their private moments. A side that was vulnerable, lonely even, despite her immense power. It was that side of her that had drawn him in, that had made him consider the unthinkable. He had come to care for her deeply. And though he had once thought of himself as a simple servant, an outsider in a world he didn't fully understand, he now realized that he had become something more. He had become a part of her life, and she had become a part of his. But with that realization came the weight of responsibility. If he accepted her proposal, he would be stepping into a world of politics and power where every decision, every word, had far-reaching consequences. He would no longer be a passive observer, he would be a player in the game. And that game, as Varric had so pointedly reminded him, was dangerous. The door to the balcony slid open behind him, and Daniel turned to see Azura stepping out into the cool night air. She was dressed in a simple, flowing gown of deep blue, her silver hair cascading down her back. There was a softness in her expression, a quiet vulnerability that she rarely showed in the public eye. For a moment they simply stood there, the silence between them filled with unspoken words. Then Azura stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "You've been distant," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I was starting to worry." Daniel looked away, his gaze returning to the city below. "I've just been thinking." Azura moved to stand beside him, her presence warm and steady. "I imagine you've had a lot to think about." He nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this, Azura, for any of it." Azura's expression softened, but there was a firmness in her voice as she spoke. "No one is ever truly ready for change, Daniel, but sometimes we have to embrace it anyway." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is more than just change. This is a complete shift in everything I've ever known. Back on Earth, marriage means something different. It's supposed to be between 2 people, 1 person, 1 commitment. What you're offering, it's not what I grew up believing in." Azura's gaze was steady, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I know this is difficult for you. Varillian customs are very different from those on Earth. But this isn't just about tradition, Daniel. It's about us, about what we could build together." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his chest. And what if I'm not strong enough for this? What if I make the wrong decisions? I'm not a politician, Azura. I don't know how to navigate this world. Azura reached out, gently placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was cool and reassuring, and for a moment Daniel felt the tension in his body ease. You don't have to be a politician, she said softly. You just have to be yourself. That's what I need. Someone who isn't caught up in the games, someone who can see things clearly, someone I can trust. Her words hit him like a wave, and for a moment he felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. Could he really do this? Could he step into this role, into this life, and be the partner she needed him to be? I'm scared, he admitted, his voice barely audible. Azura smiled faintly, her hand sliding down to take his. So am I, but sometimes the things that scare us the most are the ones worth fighting for. Daniel looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the vulnerability that she rarely allowed anyone to see. She was offering him a place by her side, not just as a consort, but as an equal, as someone who could help her carry the burdens of leadership and power. But it wasn't just her world that frightened him. It was the world he had left behind, the life he had tried to escape. His mind wandered back to Jessa, to the broken pieces of their marriage that still haunted him. The pain of their separation had been like a wound that never fully healed, and the thought of entering another marriage, especially one so vastly different, felt like reopening that wound. I don't know if I'm ready to leave everything behind, he said quietly. To leave Earth behind. Azura's expression softened, and she stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. You don't have to leave everything behind, Daniel. You can carry your past with you, but you can't let it define your future. You have a chance here to build something new, something that could be greater than anything you've ever known, but it's up to you to decide if you're ready to take that step. Daniel swallowed hard, his mind swirling with doubts and fears. He had spent so long running from his past, from the pain of his broken marriage and the life he had left behind on Earth. But here, in this alien world, he had found something unexpected. He had found connection, purpose, and if he was honest with himself, love. But could he truly leave his old life behind? Could he embrace the future that Azura was offering, with all its complexity and uncertainty? I don't want to fail you, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Azura's eyes softened, and she reached up to gently touch his cheek. You won't. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You're not alone, Daniel. You never have been. Her words washed over him like a balm, soothing the fear and uncertainty that had been gnawing at him for so long. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt a sense of clarity. Azura was offering him a chance not just to be a part of her world, but to find his own place within it, to be more than just a servant or a shadow of his past. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his decision settle over him. This was his moment, his choice, and no matter how terrifying it was, he knew that he couldn't run from it any longer. I'll do it, he said quietly, his voice steady. I'll stay. I'll be with you. Azura's eyes brightened, and for a moment, the regal mask she always wore slipped away, revealing the woman beneath the woman who had chosen him, not for his status or power, but for who he was. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. They stood there for a long moment, the city of Astera spread out before them, the stars glittering like a promise of the future that awaited them. In that moment, Daniel felt something shift inside him, a sense of acceptance, of peace. He had made his choice, and though the road ahead would be difficult, he knew that he was no longer walking it alone. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Word of Daniel's acceptance of Azura's proposal spread quickly through the palace, and soon, the entire court was abuzz with rumors and speculation. Some were shocked that Azura had chosen a man from Earth, a former servant, to be her second husband. Others whispered that it was a strategic move, a way to cement new alliances and strengthen her rule. But no matter the opinions, one thing was clear: Daniel was no longer a mere observer in Azura's world. He was now a part of it. The shift in his status was immediate. He was no longer expected to perform the duties of a servant, and instead he found himself attending meetings, standing at Azura's side during important diplomatic discussions, and even participating in strategy sessions with the council. It was overwhelming at first, the sheer complexity of the political landscape, the endless negotiations and power plays that shaped the empire. But slowly, Daniel began to find his footing. Azura guided him through it all, her patience and wisdom a constant source of strength. She never pressured him to be something he wasn't, and she valued his perspective, even when it differed from her own.